Welcome to the Forward Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is change the negative stigma around failure into a positive. Failure is only a negative if we do not learn from it and we give up. Welcome back to the Forward Podcast. So my vision is to help people overcome the fear of failure so they can live their goals and dreams. I believe that failure and the fear of failure can really paralyze the thought process to be able to take action and be able to do the things that you want to do for a whole host of reasons. But what I wanted to do in today's episode is give you 5 tips on how to overcome failure. So the 5 tips, I'll list them all off and then I'll go into them individually. So number 1, the very first step is accountability. Having accountability over what's happened is key, and I'll go into that in a minute. Number 2 is write a list of what went wrong. Number 3 is self-care, so looking after yourself, not just your physical self, but your mind as well. And then accepting what's happened, accepting the failure, and accepting that you will need some time to recover. And then number 5 is know that failure is not the end. It is part of the learning experience of life. So that's the 5 steps, the 5 things that you can do to get over failure. So number 1 is accountability. And I know you've heard me say this all the time through this podcast. And if you're listening back, especially in interviews that we're doing as well around accountability, it's the main thing that comes out of a lot of the interviews I do. And a lot of the people I speak to is about the accountability, the responsibility of what's happened. If you're suffering from a big business failure, and like when I did with my failure, if I had blamed everybody else, if I would have continued to say, oh, it was the economy, COVID, my teacher, whatever it was, the weather that day, the economy, all these things, if I'm blaming it, then I wouldn't have learned. I wouldn't have learned that I need to work on my numbers. I wouldn't have learned that I need to work on sales and marketing, systems, culture, mindset, all these things. I would have just got back up, tried to start another business, or I'd have gone and done the same thing. And the definition of insanity, as Einstein says, is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different result. So that's why the number 1 thing you can do to get over failure is hold yourself accountable, take responsibility for what's happened, and then go again. So that's number 1. Number 2 is write a list of what went wrong. You know that I did an episode very early on in this podcast and I wrote a what went wrong document. But if you can write a list of the things that you went wrong and go back to it multiple times, and sometimes it can be difficult to see. And like we were talking about in the last episode, the decisions you make to get you to where you get to, it's down to you and nobody else. You can't blame other people. You've got to take that responsibility. But if you can write a list and you can go through all of the things that went wrong and just get it out in the open, it's something that you can refer back to in the future so you don't make those same mistakes again. But just being able to brainstorm it, writing it down on a piece of paper, going back to it, adding in like what went wrong and what could you done differently, what went wrong and what could you have done, what went wrong, and what might have been out of your hands that went wrong. But just putting it all down on paper so you can see that coming again. If there was something particularly that happened, like if it was COVID, how can you COVID proof yourself? Like where could your business go and what could you do if, something like COVID completely derailed your business, and what steps could you put in place to protect you? Is there other revenue streams that you could do, other forms of business, other asset classes you could go into? So writing a list is really important because so much information comes off the back of that. And that document doesn't have to be a one-time document. You could be writing that what went wrong document for years to come and adding into it. Number 3 is self-care. So I think, and you've heard me talk about this so many times before, that your mental and emotional and physical state is key to you being successful, for you to be able to do what you need to do in life. And it's hugely important for when you're dealing with failure and you're dealing with, because it can be, failure in this country is a really negative word. And if you look it up in the dictionary, it's all it is negativity. If you've failed, you've lost, you've let down, there's all these different emotions that are going to come with it. And for you to be able to pull yourself out of that, then you're going to need to be in the best possible place, and that is self-care comes into that. Being able to exercise, being able to work on your mindset, being able to turn up as the best self every day will help you get through that. So self-care is so important to getting over failure. Number 4, the acceptance that you need time to recover. So albeit I'm talking about self-care and being able to bounce back quickly, there will be times where you just need to wallow in your own self-pity. There will be times where you just need to have your own brain space, that things will need to change in your life, that things haven't gone the way that you wanted them to go. So you just need to have acceptance that actually I am going to go through this, and it's a process. You don't want that process to last for years and years and years. You want that process to maybe last for weeks or months at best. But the fact is you just need to accept that you will go through some negative feelings and some difficult times. But I believe that those difficult times, if you add it in with the accountability, the what went wrong document, the bit of self-care, they will be short amount of times rather than a long amount of times. And then number 5 is know that failure is not the end. It's part of the learning experience of life. Once you realize that if there's a failure or a mini failure that's happened, and you know that that is experience and that is part of the learning of life, and you can look at it rather than thinking this is something really negative, but actually this is, I've learned something out of this, then that's going to help you get back on track a lot quicker. Like I was just saying, we don't want to be wallowing for too long. It is part of it. You want to be trying to get through that process really quickly. But if you know, and you already know when you've failed or failing at something, that this is just part of life, it's learning, it's part of the process of the experience. You know, falling off your bike for the first time, that's experience, that's failing. But that's failing forward because you pick your bike up and you get on it again. And one of the things I now realise is that I spent 10 years so scared of failing that it ended up making me fail in such a monstrous way, losing our business, having to sell our family home, having to go into a really horrible rented bungalow that had mold covered up in the walls. You know, all these tragically bad things happened because I was so fearful of failing that I wouldn't let myself fail for 10 years. And actually, if I look back, I wish I'd failed faster, because if I'd have failed within year 1, then I would have got to where I want to get to a lot quicker than having to wait 10 years. So quite often, you don't have to fail in one huge catastrophic way. If you can see all your mini failures and you can fail faster, then you can let the compounding of time, compound in the right way, not the wrong way. Because people always ask me, what went wrong, Henry? And I don't ever have a definite answer, because there were things like numbers, there was systems, there was my lack of knowledge in business. There was lots of different things, but I think it was the compounding of lots of little failures that compounded into one big failure. So when I'm talking about these 5 steps, I'm not necessarily just talking about you dealing with a failure and you thinking, well, I'm not going through a failure and I'm not going to go through a failure. I'm talking about all the little failures, like when something goes wrong at work, how can you hold yourself accountable? How can you write a document that didn't quite go right? That maybe that conversation with that member of staff, maybe the fact that we've got less money at the end of the month than we thought. Can you hold yourself accountable? Can you write a what went wrong document? Can you work more on your self-care? Can you have acceptance that's happened? And can you look at it and go, well, that was experience, now I move on. So lots of mini failures, if they're dealt with in the right way, will compound into a positive place. And if they're not dealt with in the right way, they can compound into one big failure. So I'd say out of that 5-step list, I would be saying that you need to fail faster and fail quicker, because the more you fail and the more you see failure as learning, and we have this as a nation and as the world, we have this more open world where we can talk about our failures openly and we can share all of our experience and be candid and talk about it and really embrace failure and see that it's learning, it's part of experience. Then as a world, we're going to fail forward and we're going to all reach success and create a good place to live for everybody. So that's the end of that episode. The next episode, I'm going to be giving you 5 tips on how to build resilience, because I also believe that we need resilience to help us overcome failure quickly. So I'm going to be giving you 5 tips. If you've liked what you heard today, please like, share and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks all.